During the last several sessions, we examined two major paradigms, the Semitic paradigm as well as the spiritual paradigm. Now, the third major paradigm that rules the world, not the entire world, but a large part of the world, is the mechanistic paradigm. This mechanistic paradigm originated in Europe. I should not say originated in Europe. There was in some way it was present in India in the ancient times. Through Charvaka philosophy, it was presented even during the Ramayana times, but it was not dominant. In India, it was never dominant. But today, you cannot say that. Today, mechanistic paradigm is dominant all over the world. All over the world. Because of certain historical reasons, it gained credence and it is very dominant. It influenced the thinking of intelligent people all over the world, even though ostensibly they are subscribing to the other two paradigms. Their thinking has been greatly influenced by the mechanistic paradigm. In that sense, I say it is a ruling power in the world. Therefore, we need to understand this paradigm if we have to deal with this thought process. It is very powerful and it is hoping to gain control over the country, not only over the country, over the whole of mankind. And the tussle has been there for quite some time. And therefore, let us understand the roots of this paradigm. As I mentioned in the recent times, its power, the spurt is because it originated in Europe and Europe was very powerful across the world. Europe saw what is known as the scientific revolution starting from 1543. That is the date people identify for scientific revolution in Europe. And it grew along with the Renaissance and along with the power of the European nations. There were several things that grew during that period. Renaissance, trade and commerce, industrial revolution, science and technology, military power, secularism, all these things grew parallelly in Europe during this period. And the theoretical foundation of this was the scientific revolution. We will examine the beginning of that scientific revolution and growth. Then we will examine what is this mechanistic model upon which the whole life is viewed upon and what is its implication that we will see in the next session and the next. So first, let us look at the history of scientific revolution. In this history, we are tracing it through a few individuals who are the leaders of the scientific revolution in Europe. The starting date, as I mentioned, it was around 1543, said to be the beginning of scientific revolution. That is the date when Copernicus first published this book on the solar system, the heliocentric solar system. The European Middle Ages, what we call as the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages in Europe, Dark Age in Europe is about 1,000 years period, starting from the 5th century to 15th century. By the beginning of the 16th century, all these movements have started. The Protestant religion started around 1517. Martin Luther's protest started around 1517 and scientific revolution 1543. The Dark Age was known as the Age of Faith, and the subsequent age is known as the Age of Reason. Renaissance impacted life in several domains: art, literature, architecture, politics, philosophy, trade, science, and industry, with revolutionary changes in the worldview of the Middle Ages. See, Europe was really struggling against the grip of papacy. Its creativity was completely stifled for 1,000 years. So the protests were brewing. And once Renaissance happened, once an opening, it got the opening, then it blossomed in several different directions, including power, science, technology, etc. So European Renaissance laid the foundation for a new worldview based on science and rationality, which is distinct from the prevalent biblical worldview. The biblical worldview was nothing but the Semitic worldview. So Europe said that let us liberate ourselves from the grip of papacy, grip of the church. And in this process, it tried to liberate itself from the grip of religion altogether. Religion and spirituality were scoffed at. It wanted to liberate itself from that. And in the process, it swung to the other extreme, and it took about 200-300 years before it could find its feet on the other extreme. The scientific outlook started demanding tangible, demonstrable scientific proof for everything. Rationality is founded based on the scientific proof. Eventually, it became a materialistic proof. Science need not be materialistic entirely, but in Europe, it took the stand that it is a materialistic worldview. The new paradigm, the mechanistic worldview, sees the universe from a scientific perspective, governed by natural laws. The model is known as the Newtonian model or the Cartesian model. How is this world? It is a kind of a clockwork. That's what Newtonian model is, also known as the mechanistic model. It sees the whole universe as a machine, a kind of deterministic clockwork. By deterministic, I mean you can predict its behavior. If you know, ideally, this is an ideal proposition, if you know the current state of the machine and you know the law of the machine, you know how it is going to work tomorrow, how it is going to work 100 years from now, how it is going to work 1,000 years from now. This is called the deterministic model. It can be predicted, it can be understood, it can be predicted. And if so, the entire past can be traced back and the entire future can be predicted. That is the essential model. What is science? Science is a search for the laws of nature or the law that governs this huge machine. It may have several ramifications. It may have branches. Ramification is branches. But all branches may not be evident to all the people. For example, a physicist will look at it from the physics perspective, how the interatomic structure, the molecular structure, etc. Whereas a chemist would see it from a different perspective, different angle. Biologist will see it in some other manner. Likewise, the human scientist, the sociologist will see it in some other perspective. But everybody is trying to understand the laws that govern this machine. And in the hope that one day we will understand this clock completely. And to understand this clock completely, all that we require is the human intellect. The human intellect is the supreme tool in the hands of mankind, which can achieve this target. Whereas compare this to the spiritual paradigm. Spiritual paradigm says the intellect cannot grasp it. What is the truth? What is the reality? What is the law? The intellect cannot grasp it. It is achintyoyam. The language cannot describe it. Then how can you grasp it? He says you develop your dhi, the mahabuddhi. It is beyond the intellect. Evam buddhe param buddha. It is beyond the intellect. Develop that subtle tool. Then you will be able to see. Paripashyanti dhira. The one who has dhi can see it everywhere. Whereas the mechanistic paradigm says human intellect is the highest, the best tool that we can get, and it can solve the mystery of nature. In the early stages of this development, the scientists who are leading it, they did not reject religion altogether, or spirituality altogether, or God altogether. For example, both Newton and Descartes. Descartes was the French philosopher. Newton was a British English scientist who made significant contribution to the conception of this mechanistic paradigm. Both of them believed in God. Though they said that God doesn't have a role in running this universe. God might have created the universe, put the laws together, put the machine together, and set it to go. And after that, God doesn't have a role to play in this, in running the universe. That was their conception. But they did not deny the presence of God or the hand of God in creating this machine. In fact, I'll show you Newton. Newton believed that from time to time, God may put his hand into the creation. And Descartes also said it is continuously perceived by a God. He doesn't intervene, but he is continuously perceived by God. That was their model. But eventually, as things started changing and science became more and more confident of itself, its own power, then it started marginalizing the creator from this creation. Among the leaders of the scientific revolution, several names I have put here. This is not an exhaustive list, but they are very prominent names in the scientific revolution and the development of this thought process. Copernicus was the first. He was the one who proposed the heliocentric model of the solar system. Earlier, people used to believe that the Earth is the center of the universe and Earth is stable and unchanging, and it is the whole world which is going around the Earth, because of which we see the day and night. But it was Copernicus who proposed that it is not the Earth, but it is the sun which is the center of the solar system. So this was a kind of a shattering change in the worldview prevalent at that time. So he published a book on the revolutions of the planets. And that book was published in 1543. On the day he published the book, and the book was released and he was given this book, he was on his deathbed and he saw the book and then he died. So Copernicus did not face any problems because of his own writing. But a few decades later, I think in 1616, the papacy or the church banned this book. It was Galileo who bore the brunt of that, because Galileo supported Copernicus' worldview, and because of which the Inquisition, the Roman Inquisition, we have discussed Inquisition under the Semitic paradigm, conducted a trial against him. He was called to Rome and appeared before the trial, and he withdrew his stand in front of the Inquisition. He said, okay, if you say so, I will withdraw my statement. For a few years, he did not do anything, but anything in the sense, did not oppose the church. But a decade later, he insisted that, no, this is really true. Copernicus' viewpoint is correct. Again, he was called and he was tried and he was given punishment, imprisonment. But the next day, they withdrew that imprisonment, changed it into house arrest. Galileo was a big name even in those days. He knew the Pope personally, and probably because of the intervention of the Pope, his conviction was reduced. But he spent the rest of his life, that is another 10 years, in house arrest until his death. Tycho Brahe and Jonathan Kepler, both these people were astronomers who were very practical astronomers who would look at the sky in the night and track the planets' movement. Day after day, they would track the movement of the planets, very meticulous. Over a period of 1 or 2 years, they tracked these planets and try to understand what laws govern the movement of these planets in the sky. They documented that, they published that. And Isaac Newton banked on these data, but he proposed a more comprehensive mathematical law, that is the law of gravitation, in 1687. Probably he detected it a little earlier, but it was published in 1687, which removed all doubts about Copernicus' theory. Even though some people had difficulty in accepting it, once Newton proved it mathematically, saying that this is the path these planets will take, and that path is nothing but what Kepler had ordained, Kepler had concluded. Those things were verified by Newton mathematically. And then the heliocentric system was acceptable as a general block of knowledge. Descartes, this is the fifth name in this list, Descartes. Descartes was a philosopher essentially, but in those days there was very little difference between a philosopher and a scientist. Everybody was a philosopher, everybody is a scientist. So he proposed certain things which is the basis of what is known as the scientific approach, scientific viewpoint. See, one aspect of a scientific way of looking at things is that it should be objective. That is the word used. It is a technical word. It says that objectively. When you say objectively, you, the observer, is outside the experiment. You're conducting a scientific experiment, but you are not part of the experiment. You are, as an observer, as a third party, you distance yourself, not only physically, but emotionally. You have to distance yourself and record things objectively. Descartes said that it is possible to do it. In fact, Descartes' philosophical point of view is that man is different from the material world. He asserted that I think, therefore I am. It's a famous statement accorded to Descartes. He said, I think, therefore I am. I exist. And the thinking world is different from the material world. So the thinking world, that is mankind, can stand outside the material world and observe. This is called objectivity. Okay. These are the leaders of scientific revolution over a period of time. You can say 1543 up to 1727 or so. But this process continued. There are many more scientists who came in the line. This is Copernicus, and you see his heliocentric model, where where the planets are supposed to be circling the sun in a circular manner. Later, Kepler told that, he concluded that it is not circles, but they will go around the sun in an elliptical orbit. Most of the planets are tracing elliptical orbits because it is extremely difficult to maintain the circular orbit, whereas elliptical orbit are possible to maintain. Yeah. The book of Copernicus was on the revolutions of the celestial spheres. He published it just before his death in 1543. The book is considered a major event in the history of science. It marked the beginning of the scientific revolution. 6 decades after the publication of this book, it was banned by the church in 1616, and the ban remained until 1835. That is more than 200 years. Yes. Okay, this is the model. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer. See, all these people were from different countries in Europe. Brahe was from Denmark. Kepler was a German. Copernicus was a Polish German. Newton was from England. And Descartes was from France. So Kepler, his work was the laws of planetary motion and the epitome of Copernican astronomy, which served as the foundation for Isaac Newton's theory of universal gravitation. Kepler depended heavily on Tycho Brahe's observations. Brahe used to sit night after night and document, and Kepler used much of that data for his own theory. Kepler derived the law of the planetary motion. There are 3 laws which he derived. First 2 of them are published in 1609. What do they say? The orbit of every planet is an ellipse with the sun at one of the 2 foci. Not at the center, but upon the focal point. Sun will remain the focal point, and therefore the planet will be close to sun during some interval. It is far off during other interval. But then when it moves, it observes a law. The law which recorded by Kepler says that, see, there are 3 sectors I have marked here, A, B, C, A, B, C. The area of all these 3 sectors are equal. That is, the speed with which a planet would move in the orbit is such that the area covered by the sector is the same for equal intervals, whether it is far off, whether it is closer. When it is closer, it will move faster. When it is far off, it will move slower. This is the second law. And the third law was published a decade later, where he said the time taken for completing one orbit, the square of that time, that is t square, is proportional to R3. R3 means the major axis. An ellipse has a major axis and a minor axis. So the major axis radial distance, sorry, not radial distance, the major axis, you raise it to the power of 3, and the time you raise it to the power of 2, they will be proportional. That was the third law which Kepler published. Galileo was one of the most remarkable scientists in the history of science, like Newton was. Galileo, Newton, then Einstein, and then during the 20th century, there are several other names you can add to this list: Niels Bohr, Schrodinger, de Broglie, etc. These are all the major names in the history of science. So Galileo worked on several fields. He's called polymath. Polymath means he has a command over several fields, as a master of several fields. Galileo's championing of heliocentrism was controversial as it appeared to refute certain biblical references interpreted as geocentrism. Earth is the center, earth cannot move. That is the belief of the traditional Christians at that time. Because there were statements in the Bible which say something like this. This is Psalm 104.5. The Lord set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. This is a biblical statement. So Galileo saying, or Copernicus saying it, and Galileo supporting it, that earth moves around the sun, is contravening this statement, and therefore the Inquisition took steps to ban the book. Until this statement is corrected, you can't publish it, they said. So the church pronounced, that is Inquisition pronounced, that the ideas that the sun stood still and that the earth moved were false and foolish and absurd, altogether contrary to Holy Scripture, and passed a decree suspending Copernicus' revolutions until it could be corrected. Galileo defended the heliocentrism and claimed that it was not contrary to scriptural passage because the scriptures are written with a certain spirit and should not be interpreted verbatim, and you should also make exceptions to the statements. That was Galileo's argument. So he published his thoughts in a book called the Dialogues. The manner in which the book was written is that there are two worldviews, two thoughts, which will argue their points of view. So on the one hand, this fellow says this, on the other hand, he says something else, the opposite to that. So these arguments he has written down in the form of a book called Dialogues. So that he did not want to attract the wrath of the Inquisition. So he said that these are only two worldviews, 2 points of views. I am not saying anything. These are only the points of view. But Inquisition did not accept this interpretation. They said that it is contravening the scriptures. The Dialogue Concerning Two Chief World Systems, that was a book published in 1632, with the formal permission from the Inquisition and the Pope. But after publication, Galileo was called to Rome to stand trial before the Inquisition. 3-4 months the trial took place, February to July, more than 4 months. The Inquisition found him vehemently suspect of heresy and sentenced to formal imprisonment, but the following day it was commuted to house arrest, where he remained for the rest of his life. During that period, he dedicated his time to write one of his finest works, the two new sciences, which are today called kinematics and strength of materials. And Albert Einstein commended these books. Galileo has been called the father of modern observational astronomy. He's called the father of modern physics. He's also called the father of modern science itself. A very high position he occupies in the history of science. And Newton was another such remarkable person who probably had wielded greater influence than Galileo. Galileo died in 1642 and Newton was born in 1642, the same year. And of course, there is a doubt about the exact date of his birth, whether it is 25th December 1642 or whether it is January 4th, 1643. His book on mathematical principles of natural philosophy was first published in 1687, laid the foundation for most of classical mechanics. And here is a poem where Alexander Pope, a British poet, says, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night, in darkness. God said, let Newton be, and all was light." In fact, Newton's worldview, the mechanistic model, is named after him, and his worldview ruled the scientific world from 1687 up to sometime 1919, until Einstein came along and Einsteinian theory refuted Newtonian mechanistic worldview almost point by point on every point. And Newton had to give his place to Einstein. Einstein is rated today as probably the greatest scientific mind in the history of mankind. This is Galileo and Newton. Newton, interestingly, did many of his major findings, discoveries, findings, his theories, in about a period interval of about 18 months in 1665. 1665 means he was 23, 24 year old. Yes. He was born in 1642. So 65 means about 23. So there was a plague in Europe at that time. Plague was raging. Therefore, people were finding safe places where they will not be affected. Newton went to his country house and stayed there for 18 months. And during this period, he made major findings. His major contribution comes from this year. This year is known as the miracle year. 1666 is known as the miracle year. And Einstein also did a similar thing in 1905. That also is called a miracle year, because Einstein published 5 papers during that year. And very knowledgeable scientists say that each one of them merited a Nobel Prize. He was just 25. He published 5 papers in 1 year, including his PhD thesis. And they say that each one of them is a major contribution to science. Yeah. By deriving Kepler's laws of planetary motion from his mathematical description of gravity, Newton removed the last doubts about the validity of the heliocentric model. Newton built the first practical reflecting telescope, an improvement on Galileo's telescope, and developed a theory of color, his book called Optics, Color, based on the observation that a prism decomposes white light into many colors of the visible spectrum. White light spreading itself has 7 colors, decomposing itself in 7 colors when it passes through a prism. This was experimented by Newton and recorded. He also formulated an empirical law of cooling, that is heat flow, and studied the speed of sound. In addition to his work on calculus, as a mathematician, Newton contributed to the study of power series, generalized the binomial theorem, and developed Newton's method for approximating the roots of a function. In fact, Newton and Leibniz independently, separately, is supposed to have developed calculus. But more recent findings show that about 200 years earlier to Newton, in Kerala, Madhavan Nambudiri or Madhavacharya he is called. He has developed calculus 200 years before Newton as well as Leibniz. The law of gravitation of Newton is the most significant contribution. It says that not each, all materials in this universe attract each other. And the force of attraction is called gravitational force. So it is proportional to the masses, the product of the masses, m1 into m2, inversely related to the square of the distance separating their centers of gravity, r, with the proportionality constant, g. So F is equal to g into m1, m2 by r square. This is a law applicable to the entire universe. And when we relate it to the earth and the objects on the surface of the earth, that acceleration due to gravity that we calculate, which is called g, upon the surface of the earth, it is 9.81 meters per second square. This gravitational force is always positive, unlike the electric and magnetic fields, where it can repulse. Attraction as well as repulsion are possible in among electrical charges. Whereas the gravitational force is always positive. Two objects attract themselves to each other. Acceleration due to gravity is independent of the mass of the object. Acceleration is independent, but the force is not independent. Acceleration due to gravity is independent. Gravity is a force that acts at a distance. This is what triggered Einstein to his general theory of relativity. See, the two objects may be at a distance of millions of kilometers, but they attract each other. How is that this force starts influencing a body at such a distance? It is acting on a distance. What is the rule governing that? And that rule, that thought led Einstein to develop his general theory of relativity, gravitational force. And he developed it in an altogether different perspective. Here he is talking about a force. He said that gravity will bend the space. The space around an object can be bent by gravity. And he said that this bending is not only effective with respect to the masses, but it is also effective with respect to light. So the light rays can be bent. That was his general theory of relativity. To the extent that there are heavy objects in the sky which can swallow all light rays. Instead of allowing them to pass through, making them bend, he said that the bending is so much that it just enters that body, which doesn't allow any light rays to get out because of this gravity. In such a case, it becomes a black hole. So all this theory was developed by Einstein, very, very remarkable insight, supported by solid mathematical proof. But until Einstein entered, Newton ruled the world, scientific world. And Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian model ruled the world. This is Newton's observation upon himself. He says, I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only a little boy laying on the seashore and diverting myself now and then in fiddling a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. If I have seen farther than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So this is cited as his humility. Usually people of great knowledge, wise people are usually humble. But Newton is not given credit. There are people who contest that he was humble. Even this last statement which is quoted here is not taken in the spirit that he is humble. It is because Robert Hooke and he had a running battle. So it is some kind of a sarcastic comment. That's what some people comment on. Yeah. Now let us look at the mechanistic model. Newton wrote in his Optics of matter being made of primitive particles, incomparably harder than any porous bodies compounded of them, even so very hard as never to wear out or break in pieces. This is one of his postulates, that he said if you split matter further and further, it becomes smaller and smaller particle. You take a clod of earth and or a stone, and you ground it to pieces and grind it further and further down. Then it will reduce it gets pulverized, it reduces into dust. You grind it further, then ultimately it will reduce to a level which he calls as the atomic level. And these atoms he conceptualized. He did not see it because he could not see it at that time. He conceptualized, saying that these atoms must be very hard, which cannot be divided further. They have a grit. Grit means cannot be ground further. Unwearable, hard objects like the billiard balls. Billiard ball is a very smooth ball, but very hard ball. So he compared it to billiard ball and said, cannot be further decomposed. That is called the atomic level. The inspiration for this thought comes from the Greek philosophers some 2000 years earlier. But this was one of his postulates. Newtonian mechanistic universe is a universe of solid matter made of atoms, small and indestructible particles that constitute its fundamental building blocks. All materials will have the same kind of atoms. That was Newton's conception. They are essentially passive and unchangeable. Their mass and form always remains constant. Newton's most important contribution to the otherwise comparable model of the Greek atomists was the precise definition of the force acting between the particles, which he called gravity. And today we know that this is not true. There are subatomic particles, proton, neutron, electrons, etc. And also, atom has vast spaces between the nucleus, and the electrons which are orbiting around them. It is difficult to see how vast it is, but somewhere I read this, it said that if the nucleus is the size of an orange, that is, the nucleus is expanded to the size of an orange, then the electrons would orbit around the earth. That is the kind of distance between the nucleus and the electron. May not be very accurate. This I have read somewhere, but may not be very accurate. But you see the vast space, empty space that is between the nuclei and the electrons. That is one aspect of the Newton's theory, the refutation of Newton's postulate. Another is that the electrons are always orbiting. They are always moving. And if you see the orbiting electron, it is in the form of a wave. So it is not a hard object at all. So as you go further down, you will start seeing this anomaly that whether it is a particle or whether it is a wave, it is difficult to see, difficult to say. So this conception of an atom was completely refuted. It is an altogether different model that has emerged at the beginning of the 20th century. Another essential characteristic of the Newtonian universe is the three-dimensional space of classic Euclidean geometry, which is absolute, constant, and always at rest. The space has no identity. It is absolute, constant, and at rest. It doesn't change. Whereas later on, Einstein showed that the space can be bent. And the space are three dimensions. That is what is called the Euclidean geometric dimensions, 3 dimensions. But he also attached a time to that as the 4th dimension. It is called the space-time model. So time is another dimension, not just like the other 3 dimensions, but a separate dimension, separate type of a dimension, but it is the 4th dimension. So the space-time model, it is called. The distinction between matter and empty space is clear and unambiguous according to Newton. What is matter and what is space? They are separate. Similarly, time is absolute, autonomous, and independent of the material world. It is absolute, autonomous, and independent of the material world. It shows a uniform and unchangeable flow. Time is flowing always. We are always in the present moment, but we had a past, we have a future, and the time flows in one direction, only in one direction, not in the other direction. And the flow is uniform and unchangeable. It is not that sometimes time flows faster and in some other interval it flows slower. It doesn't happen that way. That is his model. Uniform and unchangeable flow from the past through the present to the future. According to Newton, all physical processes can be reduced to movements of material points that result from the force of gravity acting among them. Gravity is the fundamental law according to Newton. In fact, when Copernicus presented the heliocentric model, that is called the worldview. What is the worldview? Earth is not the center, but the sun is the center. That is the worldview. But Newton came along and gave a mathematical theory of gravity. Now, gravity is the fundamental thought, fundamental idea. Another important influence in the philosophy